the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Welcome to Bronxtalk. One of the important missions of the 20 years of our program is to bring the people of the Bronx closer to their elected officials. And it's been a while since we checked in with the City Council, and so tonight we thought we'd reach the two different parts of the Bronx to visit with a couple of council members to review a variety of items, including the controversial proposal to decriminalize minor offenses, ongoing concerns about the relationship between police and minority communities, both here in New York and around the nation, and in Baltimore, including Baltimore. If you saw the news today, development and gentrification will be on our list, a number of housing issues, how is the new chancellor doing with our schools, and much more. You can speak to tonight's guests and weigh in with questions or comments on these issues and others by calling in at 718-960-7261. You can also email them to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org or post them on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. For the here and now, in the studio, it's council member from the 16th District that includes the Bronx neighborhoods of the West Bronx, Morrisania, Highbridge, and Melrose. Welcome back, Vanessa Gibson. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me again.
And from the 12th Council District that includes the Northeast Bronx neighborhoods of Gun Hill, Edenwald, Baychester, and Williamsbridge, Councilmember Andy King, thank you for joining us, sir.
Honor and a pleasure, young man.
Before we get into our, as News 12 would say, hyper-local issues, I do want to talk about the news coming out of Baltimore today, and then, of course, it is certainly relevant to so many issues that we would talk about tonight. We saw that with the death of Freddie Gray, allegedly at the hand of police, nothing's been confirmed yet, that on the day of his very funeral, there was unrest to the point of literal rioting in Baltimore. Your thoughts?
Well, I think you have a community right now that's really just tired and fed up. And when you have young people who are just full of anger and energy, you get chaos and rioting, which is happening in Baltimore right now. There isn't really any structure, organizing of marching or anything like that, which happened the day before. But today was just the pinnacle of all their anger that was pent up, and you saw it in burning cars, boulders being thrown at officers, young kids just yelling and cuss. I even saw when they're burning a CVS out there, and when the fire department hooked up the hose to the hydrant, as soon as the firemen walked away, they took a knife and poked the holes in the holes to prevent the water from getting there.
What factors go in to creating that kind of anger and tension? And I'm guessing that a lot of these young people are not all that unruly in their schools or elsewhere. We certainly couldn't have a society if we had that many people who lived every day like that. Right. What turns a young person into, frankly, a thug in that circumstance?
I say lack of hope and despair. If you don't give people hope and opportunities to improve their lives, this is what you get. And some of it is actually, created. I listened to one of the young women, the grandmother, who talked about, their communities, that community itself. The CVS that was just built was one of the newest stores. They have no food, no supermarkets. They go like the corner bodegas to get their food. How do you have, in 2015, have a community that doesn't have a food mart, that you can actually go buy quality foods?
Councilmember, your thoughts in general on it, and then we could break. I also, you're the chair of the Public Safety Committee in the council, and I do want to talk to you about some of the police issues. Yes. But let's talk about in general, though. What do you think?
So, just first and foremost, my thoughts and prayers are to the family of Freddie Gray, to his family and friends, and to actually the people in Baltimore. You know, this is certainly another tragedy where we've seen a young African-American male who's been killed while in police custody. While the details of the case still have to come out, we know that certainly Freddie Gray is reflective of many communities where there has been a Freddie Gray. And I think, as my colleague has said, the reason why people are so frustrated is because they know that they could easily be a Freddie Gray. And because he looks like them, he comes from their community. I think it's because there's been such a pattern and a systemic pattern of just broken community relationships with the police, with law enforcement on a national level. I think, you know, you have people that don't trust police. They don't think they're serving in their best interest. And we've done a lot in this nation, in this city, to really build and improve. But whenever you have a tragic accident, incident, a murder, you know, anything that happens like that, you have people that will start to react in that way.
You know, I would certainly agree that you know, the death of Freddie Gray was the match that lit it. But what the council member was suggesting is that, and certainly I was suggesting, that there's more tension, there's more frustration,
Absolutely.
and that if you have people looting stores,
Yes.
that's not just protesting the fact that the police may be misbehaving. That's protesting the fact that, as the council member said, there's no hope or anything like that. How does a society get to that point, and are you concerned even about in the Bronx or other places that we are at a point where you just have a match like that and you could ignite something as serious as what's
Right.
going on in Baltimore?
So the one thing I try not to do is compare New York City to any other place, whether it's Ferguson or any other city in this country. I do think in the city of New York, in the city council, we have made a great effort and a lot of investment. When you talk about a community where it lacks hope, it lacks opportunity, it lacks people that have a vision, it lacks leadership oftentimes in the electorate, in the political system, we have invested a lot of programs to cater to young people, to children, to seniors, to parents. Summer youth programs, a lot of intervention, a lot of prevention, anti-gun violence programs, where we have said we have to look at communities that have been poverty-stricken, where there's high unemployment, high crime, and tackle the roots of those problems. I think when you get to the roots of a lot of these issues, you start to delve into the gang issue, the broken homes, the breakdown of traditional family, the fact that we have school systems that don't provide quality education. All of that is relative when you look at crime, when you look at people reacting. So I think a lot of times when you talk about that match, it takes an incident like this to ignite all of those feelings of resentment, of frustration, of anger that start to build up and fester.
Yeah, I don't want to spend a lot of time on the city of Baltimore because I'd have to spend a lot more time there to be able to evaluate what you're suggesting. But that brings us right up to the point where we can talk about the what is the loudest proposal we've heard, and that's in all the newspapers now, and that's the idea of decriminalizing minor offenses. This idea of broken windows policing that many people thought was, you know, a really good way to get at, you know, start with smaller crimes. If you
right.
start, I mean, this is the broken window theory. It was popularized during Bratton's first term when Rudy Giuliani was here, and say, you know what, if we get at those small crimes, if we stop the squeegee men on the street, if we get at all the little things, we can use that as an entree to really establishing a, you know, a peaceful, just,
society.
nonviolent
Right.
society. Yet now the city council, led by the speaker, who will be on our show May 11th, by the way, keep that in mind, is saying that we want to back off and decriminalize minor offenses. Your thoughts?
So I think there's a lot of discussion that has started to take place between the council, the administration, the police department, the mayor, and other stakeholders that I think need to be involved in this conversation. We're talking about a major transformation to me. We're looking at some of the criminal offenses right now, like public urination, staying in the park after dark, jumping the turnstile, where there's a high incidents of young people, of New Yorkers that are getting these criminal summons, and we're looking at how can we try to not only prevent them. For me, prevention is key. Prevent them from getting these criminal summons, but should they turn into a civil offense where you instead would get a ticket? One of the things I think we need to be very understanding of is right now with criminal offenses, when you stop someone for breaking one of these rules, you're able to ask for identification. That usually can lead to the history of that individual to determine if there's an outstanding warrant or
So
something
you're
of that
saying if
nature.
somebody jumps over the turnstile or is arrested for or is stopped for an open container of alcohol or something like that, they get stopped. and all of a sudden they get looked up and their whole history gets looked up. That's of concern to you.
So that's been an issue that's been raised to me by many community residents and advocates. But then on the other side, what we're looking at saying is that are these incidents, are these infractions to the extent where there should be a criminal offense? Can we shift them to civil, where instead of getting an actual summons, you would go and you would pay a fine instead?
Councilmember King, is the broken windows theory broken? And really,
need a repair?
is it in fact, would we be dismantling one of, the most successful tools we've had in keeping crime down in the city of New York?
I think the issue with broken windows that it hasn't been spread fairly across the city of New York. And I think that's how we've gotten to this place. How do we decriminalize some things that would hold people accountable for bad behavior? If you're not looking at making sure that your policing system is equal, that means in communities that are of color as well as communities not of color, that they get treated the same, then we're probably not at this stage right now. The reason that we're having these conversations is because we're tired of being mistreated in communities of color by thinking that the police are policing us and not serving us. And I'm all for a better quality of life, and for sometimes you need to have strong laws in place so people don't violate how we're supposed to live. And I think we have to evaluate how broken windows is delivered and where we need to tweak it, and then do what we have to do to make a better New York.
Is it possible that, of what Councilmember Gibson is saying, that we could not only decriminalize it, but still stop the behavior on the lower end?
Well,
in other ways.
This is going to be a spirited debate, because I'm not sure that decriminalizing some of the things that they're asking to decriminalize will actually improve behaviors, what doors will open up, what end results will happen if you take certain stringent punishments from a particular act, how it actually will have a positive impact. I'm not sure by decriminalizing some of the things that have been discussed will actually improve the quality of life in New York.
It sounds like there will be a vigorous debate. I do want to mention that as soon as we mentioned on Facebook that both of you were coming on the show, and we mentioned this was going to be one of the topics, we already got comments. So I want to throw the comments and just have you comment on those.
Sure.
So Judith G. Wrote up, and I think they're going to put them up on the screen. Decriminalization of low-level crimes is a disservice to law-abiding citizens. Are we now going to turn over the city to criminals? ? Stupid idea. The second came from Sandra R. on Facebook. If the talk is on stoplight running, egging or toilet papering a house on Halloween, fare beaters or something along those lines, those are mischievous acts and I welcome it. Borderline felon acts or acts of violence, then no. So your thoughts on our first viewer comments? We didn't even put it on the show yet, and people were having something to say.
So I understand.
Stupid idea is the first reaction.
So I understand the concern. I mean, I've heard that several times before from just the public because there's been so much media attention given to this the past several weeks. What I would say is because there hasn't been, equity across the board in terms of enforcement, that's the reason why we're here. Right now, there are about a million summons that are outstanding in this city. And we have to look at the fact that, there are so many summons that have not been addressed. And ultimately, if you don't address them, they turn into arrest warrants. So what we're saying is, do we need to keep these particular low-level offenses on the books as a criminal offense, or should they be transferred to civil?
We could do the whole show on this topic. I want to ask you real quick. I know it certainly is. You are in favor of body cameras for police officers?
Yes.
Will that help some of these incidents that are the strike the match that light the neighborhoods?
Yes, I think it's a strong component as a part of the overall reform and conversation. Yes.
The mayor has a housing plan to build 200,000 units of housing, and one of the exponents of that is something that is going to be, or allegedly, in your district, and that is the rezoning of parts of Jerome Avenue. We've done a lot of work on it. I guess the first question is, do you believe, because so many people are concerned about it, that it's being done with the community's input? Or is this a top-down process that is just kind of the community's not really having its say?
Okay, so I am the council member that represents this area. It's about 81 blocks of potential upzoning and rezoning in an area that has not been given a lot of attention by the city. So Jerome Cromwell, Community Boards 4 and 5, we are looking at a lot of things in terms of affordable housing, the existing infrastructure, open space, parkland, transportation, access to mass transit, my education system. So this is going to be a plan that's going to be driven by the community. The City Department of Planning is spearheading a lot of the working groups, but they're working in concert with stakeholders. There are a lot of tenant advocates, a lot of business owners on the Jerome Strip that are very interested in this, but we want to make sure that there are several things that we keep in mind. Investment has to be made on the existing infrastructure. The housing has to truly be affordable for the residents that live there. While we welcome new residents, we have to take care of the residents that are there first. Number 3, we want to make sure that there are good jobs, union jobs that pay a sufficient wage so people can lift themselves out of poverty. And number 4, we want to make sure that there's a partnership. This is a long-term plan. All of the agencies have to be involved because I'm concerned about mass transit and all the other factors when you talk about this.
Do you believe the community is getting to have its say? It sounded like you're saying that the community is involved in the process, because that was among the major contentions when we studied it on the show.
Yes, I do think the community is involved, and they're going to continue to be involved, and I have made my points and my positions known to planning and all the other partners that are involved. This is a lot for me. It's my first zoning proposal, so I'm very excited, but I'm also very cautious because I want to make sure that this is done the right way. We have seen past examples in previous administrations where zoning was done not in the community's best interest. That is not going to happen with Jerome Cromwell.
Is it possible to do something like this without displacing, number 1, residents, and number 2, some commercial businesses that may have been there for many years, even if they're, not highly prized at this moment?
So I believe so. Yes, I am going to make sure that we have little displacement. Any relocation has to be done in support with the community. Jerome Avenue businesses, the auto industry that has been there, future use of that, they have a potential to remain there, or either, whatever it is that they want, we're working with business leaders, the bids, the merchants associations, to make sure that, we include them, we include their concerns. There's so much in this plan, but I'm going to make sure that stakeholders are very much a part of this.
Councilmember King is not off the hook. We're going to talk about development in his area in just a moment, but I do understand that Jeffrey is on the phone. I don't know what neighborhood that is, but Jeffrey, hi, welcome to Bronx Talk. How are you? Hi, Jeff. Do we have Jeffrey? Hello?
Hello.
Yeah, hi, are you
good
with us?
evening. I'm from the Bronx.
Okay. Go ahead. And what's your question or statement?
I'm from the Bronx, and I was just listening in just now, and I think the young lady that's there, she made some very pertinent points when she talked about a lot of the causes of crime. And one of the issues, or a few of the issues that she addressed is, I think one of the major ones is that our youth, have become so violent, now in the community that, it's gotten out of control.
So, Jeff,
it's gotten way out of control.
What would you want to see?
Some of the issues that she made, she talked about.
Well, my question is, what would you want to see to correct that?
Well, I think in order to correct that, I think, that our community leaders as well as our activists have to become more involved with actually, going in the street and actually, starting to mentor to our young kids. I think that's where it starts from. It starts in the household as well, but it also starts with our activists involving our youth in what we're doing.
Right. Role modeling is a really important
step.
Right.
Jeffrey,
because our youth really don't have any voice.
Yeah,
they don't
that's
have a
absolutely
mechanism
true.
in which, to be able to speak.
Jeffrey, thank you very much for the phone call. We appreciate it. I want to just add something, and I do want to get back to the development question. In my neighborhood, they reconfigured a park and they eliminated a basketball court. And I'm like, this is exactly wrong. And when I posted on Facebook, on my own personal Facebook page, that had happened, I heard from 2 other Bronx neighborhoods where that had happened. Wow. To me, that's the wrong direction. That's my editorial comment. But we can't be taking down basketball courts in our neighborhoods, because then you're only going to create more situations like you have in Baltimore or elsewhere. Anyway, back to the idea of development. One Community Board 12 member told me that he's concerned that the Northeast Bronx is becoming a dumping ground for group homes and that the community is losing its ability to dictate what it wants to see. They gave me an address of 3030 Bruner Avenue, might end up being a group home or maybe even a more stringent security facility. Tell me about that condition, or is that a condition and a concern for you and your community?
It is very much a concern. I've reached out to the Department of Homeless Services, and we've had meetings in regards to the Bronx being used as a dumping ground. I clearly say, while we're trying to help individuals who have had some challenges, if you're not from the Bronx, and as much as we want to help you, how do you continue to keep moving people around from different boroughs? And we're finding that the Bronx is taking in more folks than others. The particular facility that you're talking about, yes, I am in talks with them specifically because it was first rated as ranked, as they rated on a piece of paper, as a jail, which you can't put in a residential neighborhood. So as we pushed back, we found out they tried to change the code. So now I've asked for an investigation of how do you change the code, because someone realized that at first the correction said this is what it's going to be. Then when they realized they couldn't do it, someone finagled and changed the code. So I'm waiting for the investigation and the report to come back
on that particular
site, because it's right in the middle of homes.
You know, in our 20 years plus of doing this program, this is not the first time I've had this dialogue, not only with you, but with communities all over the Bronx. But do you have sympathy for the mayor and the Department of Homeless Services that says, you know what, everybody complains about homelessness, but unless we find places to put people, and not only homeless people, but people who need support and care, and every neighborhood says not in my neighborhood. So how do we balance that out so that you and all the other elected officials and other community members don't react like that?
Quickly. The administration has to recognize that we are, as they say, we are diverse communities in New York. Then you need to give everyone their fair share. What I've learned is that if someone goes homeless in Brooklyn, and if they come from a community of color and there's no housing there, they will shift them to another borough of community of color, as opposed to if this is where you live, then you should find some housing for where you live. Not uprooting families and children and taking them out of their schools to place them somewhere because you, quote unquote, there isn't a community that looks like your ethnic makeup.
So your concern is that if it's somebody from elsewhere, then they put them in your neighborhood or any Bronx neighborhood, it becomes a problem.
Everyone should have their fair share.
You know, we're just got to keep moving along, because every one of these topics is a whole show. We could do a whole show on that.
Yes.
Councilmember, what do you make of the increasing numbers of students opting out of standardized testing? Are you happy with the new Chancellor, Carmen Farina, and is she doing a good job, or do we still have a lot of work to do?
I think Chancellor Farina is doing a great job. I'm particularly impressed because I have made sure that she has come to the Bronx and visited School District 9 more than once, and she has. I'm impressed with the dual language schools that we have increased opportunities to make sure that our English language learners have access to quality education. I'm also impressed with the community renewal schools, which to me are to identify underperforming schools, to bring in an exorbitant amount of community organizations, school-based health centers, which I'm a fan of, to make sure that we address some of the other social issues that are facing many of our children. So I think the Chancellor's done a good job. She faces a lot of challenges because, you know, we've had some state law that's come down that we now have to comply with, the standardized testing. You know, I don't want us to have an environment where we set kids up to just be good test takers. I was not a good test taker in school. If I was, maybe I would have done better. But I did everything else good. I was a good student in class. I did my homework well. I did well. But my standardized tests, I was horrible. So I don't want the focus to all be on standardized tests, because children have to learn.
But this is coming down not only from the governor, but it comes down from the federal government as well.
True.
So
that's true.
So your idea is to move it away from that.
So I'm of the mindset where we have to look at balance. We have to make sure, and again, a lot of the standardized test conversation is really about teacher evaluation. It's about measuring how teachers are performing and teaching our children. That's basically the premise of this, and that's why, you know, this year you saw such, you know, an enormous amount of advertising and promoting on parents opting their children out of testing. I don't think testing should ever be the only sole thing we look at when we look at children's performance. I think we have to look at other things to make sure. We have to bring back arts in our schools. We have some school buildings that don't even have a gymnasium, and there's a phys ed requirement in the state. So I think there are a lot of other things that we have to look at when you talk about well-rounded students and not just based it on standardized tests.
Councilmember King, what are your constituents saying about their schools? They're happy with their public schools, and if not, what are the concerns?
Well, we have their challenges like every other school system, and we're looking to give them the resources they need to educate their children. When it comes to removing kids opting out of tests, there is some concern. You know, we understand that we don't want to teach our kids to the test, but testing is part of the learning experience, and I concur with my council colleague here that we need to have a balance. But to remove it totally and that becomes the focus, parents start opting out, I can see in the communities where there is always an imbalance between communities of color or well-to-do communities and communities not doing well, that you start reducing the standards where parents will say, instead of educating my child and making sure my child is prepared for testing, that we're going to opt out, then you start reducing the standards, and who actually will get hurt in the long run? Yeah, I know our communities are going to get hurt in the long run. So I'm not.
Are you in favor of the state increasing the charter school limits? Do you like the idea and the direction that the charter school movement is going? I'm
going to say this, and I will continue to say this. I do not like dual school systems. If the charter schools is the method of education that produces excellence in our children, then let that be the system that we operate. I don't like a public school system and a charter school system. I don't want to see parents fighting against parents, students on the first floor, your brothers on the one floor, and your sisters on, and you can't talk to them because you're in two different schools. It doesn't make any sense. At the end of the day, they all got to take the same SATs, the same Regents, all these tests to make sure that they're able to graduate. So I'm saying, if the charter school is the model school, then let's work with our unions and work with our principals and have one educational system.
I would suggest that that's a nice idea, but we're pretty far away from that right
Yes,
now. Given the strength of the charter school movement, what you say sounds like a good idea, but certainly then you'd have to start measuring, expenditure per student.
Right.
And
well, let's take the money out of education, we'd be all right.
Oh my! Yeah. He didn't really say that. Councilmember Gibson, just on the same note, the state is debating, and you were formerly an assembly member, so you know what it's like up there.
Yes.
They're currently talking about
Yes.
mayoral control.
Yes.
And do you think we ought to change the actual system of governance, or right now is that the system that we need right now in our schools?
So I take myself back to 2009 when I was first elected to the Assembly. My first vote in the Assembly as a new member was mayoral control in 2009.
Wow.
And I was one of 18 members that voted no. Because at the time I didn't think it was the best option for the city of New York, for the largest school district in this country. But I think my position has changed a little bit because I've been able to work under, this new administration, this new chancellor, and I like where we are going. So if I were an assembly member right now, I would talk to, my colleagues, and I would support extending mayoral control for another sunset,
At
but not
minimum,
permanent.
to not upset the apple cart.
Yes, that's
A yes
correct.
or no question. Are the
No
malls
permanent.
in Bay Plaza, the new mall in Bay Plaza, hurting the local businesses in your district?
Nah.
No. Nah. It was not a yes or no. It was a yay or nah. Councilmember Andy King, thank you. Councilmember Vanessa Gibson, thank you both for joining us. Folks, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org or put them on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. Please like the Bronx Talk Facebook page. You can check the archives at bronxnet.org. You'll find Bronx Talk on the lower right navigation bar. We got a lot of nice shows coming up. Next week, we talk more about standing up to violence, specifically in the Bronx for this coming summer. The week after that, to follow up this program tonight, as I mentioned, Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito will be our guest. And on May 18th, Bronx Borough historian Lloyd Alton will be our guest. He's always a great guest. And that's all. We'll see you. Good night. Thank you for joining us. And we'll be back next Monday night for more Bronx Talk.